The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So, totally unsurprisingly, ex-Senator Joe Lieberman is advocating that New Yorkers not vote for the actual Democratic nominee in the 14th District, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but instead vote for Congressman Joe Crowley, the incumbent who didn't even bother to show up to a debate against his challenger and ultimately was ousted. And he says his argument for this is that the victory by Ocasio-Cortez seems likely to hurt Congress, America, and the Democratic Party. And he is encouraging people to support Crowley, whose name right now is actually going to appear on the ballot as a nominee of the Working Families Party. He, of course, lost the Democratic nomination, but his name is going to be on the ballot. And I've had my critiques of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but when it comes to Joe Lieberman, I'm completely unsurprised that he would say this for a number of different reasons. Number one, Lieberman is a very centrist Democrat. He always has been. He was never Elizabeth Warren, or fill in Bernie Sanders, whatever you want to say. But also his sort of background in having lost a primary challenge himself, it just strikes me as bitter, Pat. But at the same time, it kind of strikes me as sad because Lieberman just doesn't strike me as relevant anymore.
And the thing is, whenever an establishment Democrat beats a progressive Democrat, like, for example, Hillary Clinton beating Bernie Sanders, they always say, we have to unite as a party, right? The progressive person should endorse the corporate establishment type and just move on, right? We got to move on and try to beat the Republicans. And for some reason, when the roles reverse, that's not the tune that they're expressing anymore.
Well, if Crowley is a Working Family Party member and not a Democratic Party member, then the argument of party unity kind of goes by the wayside. But of course, that's just kind of ridiculous. The guy's been a Democrat in Congress for years.
Yeah, it's such a silly loophole. And I'm pretty worried about it, not because I think that Joe Crowley has any chance at winning at the general election, but more so that it could split the vote, right? What if Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez receives 30% of the vote and Crowley gets 30% and the Republican sweeps in, wins New York 14 with 40% of the vote? That would be horrible.
So it's not even clear that we know for sure what's going on because Crowley has insisted he's not running as a third party write-in, whatever. And he says, support Ocasio-Cortez. I support her. But then at the same time, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez last week made the allegation on Twitter that she believes Crowley is going to mount a third-party challenge to her general election campaign in November. And she says that he stood her up 3 times for concession calls. Quite frankly, I don't even care about following the specifics. It's just, if any of this stuff is true, it really does ring to me as sore loserism, which, as you know, Pat, I'm against, unless you feel that you unfairly lost.
Yeah.
You can't lose more fairly than he lost. He literally skipped a debate against his opponent. This guy lost fair and square.
Yeah, I remember when we did that video on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez doing a poor job answering that Israel-Palestine question. Yep. My thoughts were, well, what's the alternative, right? I mean, if you live in New York 14 and you're a Democrat, you ought to support her. There really aren't any other choices. I guess some people who were upset by that performance, who realized that maybe AOC isn't the best on policy and can't go into depth, maybe they'll decide to vote for Crowley. That would be my concern. And also, maybe we're focusing too much on this one race because there are 435 House seats up for grabs after all.
Let's focus in on you now calling her AOC. I can't believe you're actually buying into that. For some reason, I don't like that. I'm not going to say AOC if I can, unless I am like incredibly pressed for time. I'm fighting that abbreviation. I don't like it.
Yeah, I get kind of messed up on names sometimes. So if I can just get the abbreviation, AOC works for me.
After the infamous Hillary Clinton issue, you decided you're going to go with abbreviations anytime you can. HRC.
Yes.
Okay. I am genuinely curious to get Pat's view on a blockbuster decision from the US FDA, which seems to have gone sour, pun, on non-dairy milk alternatives that are calling themselves milk. We talked about this a while ago, Pat, and basically the controversy is that there are products that are sometimes used in lieu of milk, like almond milk, soy milk, coconut milk, whatever, cashew milk. Is cashew milk a thing?
Yep.
I think it is. It is. But by definition, they're not milk because they are not as Pat often likes to say, the lactations of a mammal. So then can you really call it milk? And I was sort of split on the issue because on the one hand, we know that the FDA is very much connected to the industries it's supposed to regulate. And the dairy industry would love it if almond milk can't be called milk because it helps their brand of actual milk. But at the same time, it's not milk. It's just not milk. It's a product made from almonds, which I think are a legume, not a nut, if I recall correctly.
I don't know about that.
Maybe not. Or made from soy, which is I think soybean is a legume, right? It's not, yeah. Anyway, what do I know? Anyway, these things aren't milk. So I really was feeling mixed on it. And now we have a comment from FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who says that the FDA is going to be issuing new guidance on this and that they are going to get tough on the labeling of soy and almond products as milk.
This all has to do with corporate interest, doesn't it? Right? Because these soy milks and coconut milks and almond milks, they're really hurting the dairy industry. And it's no surprise that the person in Congress spearheading this is Wisconsin Senator Tammy Baldwin. Wisconsin, of course, known for its dairy, known for its cows. And, my whole take on this is that, sure, our definition of milk was pretty limited for the longest time. The secretions from a cow or a goat or any other mammal, right?
I think they're called lactations.
Okay, yeah, either one. I think lactations is a more specific secretion, but
yeah, either
one works. But definitions change over time, right? So I have the Google Dictionary up here right now. And defined milk, I see, it's not the number 1 and number 2 definition, but I see the white juice of certain plants. And I also see as a number 4 definition, a creamy textured liquid with a particular ingredient or use. Both of which I think fit when you talk about almond milk, when you talk about soy milk, when you talk about coconut milk. I rest my case here.
Well, you're completely subjugated by the postmodernist Marxists, where words have no more meaning and anything can be anything. I mean, listen, that is, there are plants that have thick leaves that you could pull a milky white substance out of. Is that milk now? Is that now called milk? It came from this leaf?
I respond with this: milk of magnesia. Do we have to get rid of that? Because that's been around for a long time, and we've been calling it milk of magnesia for a very long time. Do we have to go back to the chemical name for it?
I think we do. I think we absolutely do. To put a final point on this, if a product doesn't have eggs and it's called mayonnaise, is it really mayonnaise?
According to the FDA, it is not, because by the FDA's definition of what mayonnaise is, it has to include eggs. And that was a controversy a couple years back between the egg industry and this company called Just Mayo. Actually, buy and endorse their products. Not a paid advertisement.
The new thing now is that you will see actual mayonnaise being called real mayonnaise. So before you had mayonnaise. Then there were egg-free mayonnaises developed. And so the real mayonnaise world started labeling their products as real mayonnaise as opposed to fake mayonnaise. Anyway, I understand the risks of mayonnaise with eggs, because aren't the eggs in mayonnaise raw?
Unclear. I don't know if anyone knows that.
Maybe I'm confusing it with hollandaise. Now I'm not sure. Anyway, I love mayonnaise. I know a lot of people are disgusted by it. I absolutely love mayonnaise in limited amounts. I never like anything slathered with mayonnaise, but mayonnaise makes French fries better. Mayonnaise makes Wiener Schnitzel, or in its Argentinian version, milanesa, better. What doesn't get better with mayonnaise other than sushi? Sushi with mayonnaise? No, thank you.
Yeah, what we have to do? We have to do another taste test on the show. We recently did a bourbon one for my birthday, right? We have to get a bunch of mock meats and also like a mock mayonnaise, some mock milks, and we'll have you try all of them. You don't have to compare it to the real thing. We just have to see whether or not you like it.
Oh, I'm not saying I wouldn't like fake mayonnaise. It's just not mayonnaise if it doesn't have eggs, you know? That's all I'm saying. Okay, let's move on. There is an increase in liver disease deaths among young people. It correlates with alcohol consumption, and there is the suggestion from the University of Michigan Medical School that it also has a causal relationship to drinking. And this has now been published in a study in BMJ, and it points out that fatal liver disease has gone up, that young people are being hit the hardest, and that it seems to be connected with increased drinking, and that the illness can be caused by a number of different conditions, obesity, hepatitis C, but that increased alcohol consumption at least seems to be the most sort of lifestyle choice related cause, and that the number of 25 to 34-year-old Americans who are dying from alcohol related liver disease nearly has tripled from 99 to 2016. And of course, you do have to account for the increased population when you do that, but even still, there is a rate adjusted increase. You know, it's interesting to me, Pat, because I was under the impression that particularly with the legalization of marijuana, that binge drinking wasn't as popular anymore as like when I was in college, but apparently it still is a pretty major issue.
Yeah, apparently you can do the binge drinking and smoke marijuana at the same time, and maybe that's
Who
what's
knew?
going on. I mean, I think it follows that many young people will binge drink, say, in college, and then develop a long-term problem with the substance as they get older. I think that
Right.
makes sense. But I don't know if I buy it that the rates of binge drinking have gone up so significantly in the past 10, 20 years. I don't know if we can even like look at studies based on that sort of thing. Maybe it's more of like culturally influenced in some way. But I don't know if I buy that. I feel like binge drinking's been going on in the 70s and the 80s on college campuses. It's not really like a
Well, you
new
know,
thing.
there's a couple different issues. One is anytime you survey people about their use of intoxicants or other types of drugs, hallucinogenics, you never know for sure. People, I think people are less likely to be honest about that than they are about, like, do you own a car? There's not really as much stigma associated with just asking people if they own a car. There is some stigma associated with drinking and drug use, although it does change over time. The other connection that has been made is that the economy is to blame. That when times are difficult economically, and even though we have sort of in some ways a good economy and have for about 8 years, at the same time, wages have been stagnant. You have young people delaying the purchases of homes longer than they have previously, delaying marriage, all for financial reasons. That actually leads people to drinking, and that, I mean, it's certainly a nice coherent narrative. I don't know if it's totally backed up in the data.
Right. And, maybe it has to do with the fact that the economy was so poor 8, 10 years ago, right? Because maybe in people's formative years when they were 18, 19, 20 years old trying to either get a job or go on to college, they were having a really tough time doing so, right? Because
Right.
very few jobs were there to go around. And so maybe they turned to drinking, and 10 years later, they're having issues with their liver and developing all these different diseases. Yeah, very sad, very unfortunate. I think it's a pretty straightforward thing to tie it to, right? The economy, that seems to be the explanation for a lot of things.
Do you know people like in your personal life right now, people your age, who you would say have a drinking problem? Like it's an unhealthy amount of drinking that
Oh,
they're
yeah.
doing?
Yeah, absolutely, I do. And unfortunately, when someone's in their 20s and has a drinking problem, it's not taken as seriously, right?
Yeah.
Because they're still thought of as, young and reckless. And there's this idea that maybe as they get older, they'll wisen up with it. But I could definitely say that, yeah, I have a few friends who struggle with alcohol.
Yeah, I have a lot of people I know that do. Nobody who's maybe like one pretty close friend, but I know of people from my high school graduating class who had already been to like intensive ship away camp rehab type places by age 25 and 26. And oftentimes it's never as cartoonish as it's represented on TV and in movies. When someone really has a drinking problem, it's often more difficult to suss it out, and it's certainly far less glamorous. Let me put it that way, but not an altogether uncommon thing.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's one of the worst drugs to get off of, right? The
Mm.
withdrawal from alcohol can actually kill you. There's very few other substances you can say that about.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know that. All right, that's it for today's bonus show. I think it went well for the remote. For when I'm remote, Pat, I think today was one of the better days in terms of how it went. I now am able. We've improved a lot of the different tech things for how things work when I'm remote, and I have to say I'm pretty pleased with how it went today.
Yeah, we were able to do the interview remote too, which we can't normally do.
No, yeah, that big win in the battle of ideas for sure. That's it for today. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.